Welcome, everybody.
All right.
We're so glad to have y'all here. My name's E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We normally are coming to you live from our campus next to Agnes Scott College in Decatur. But I am coming to you live from my home office in Atlanta. Ed is also here in Atlanta with me. And our other folks here tonight are located in New York and in Connecticut. So we're glad to get to do this virtual event. Sometimes the gift of these virtual times is that we get to bring really cool panels together. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. The library is currently closed for physical browsing, but the online catalog and the archives are alive and well. And we're really lucky tonight because we have some librarians in the chat with us. And as we're going to be talking about Ring Shout and kind of talking about the historical aspects of it and kind of what fiction can say to history and to this contemporary moment, they're going to be dropping articles and things you can look at in the library to enhance your reading of Ring Shout. So please patronize the library, and just the wealth of resources there are amazing. So first I'm going to introduce Ed Hall. He is one of Karis's favorite folks, and he's going to be our moderator tonight. He is an Alabama escapee and lifelong Southerner. He co-edited the 2013 anthology Mothership: Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond, which the magazine of fantasy and science fiction suggested might be one of the most important sci-fi anthologies of the decade. Dread Isle is his forthcoming first novel, and we're definitely going to be doing a party for that pretty soon, as soon as we get that locked down. So welcome, Ed. We're glad you're here. And we're joined by Victor Lavalle. Victor is the author of the short story collection Slapboxing with Jesus, which I was just saying was my first introduction to Victor way back in the day. 4 novels, including The Ecstatic, Big Machine, The Devil in Silver, and The Changeling, and 2 novellas, Lucretia and the Croons, and The Ballad of Black Tom. He is also the creator and writer of a comic book, Victor Lavalle's Destroyer. He has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the World Fantasy Award, British World Fantasy Award, Bram Stoker Award, Whitting Writers Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, Shirley Jackson Award, American Book Award, and the Key to Southeast Queens. He was raised in Queens, New York, and he now lives in Washington Heights with his wife and kids and teaches at Columbia University. We're here tonight to celebrate the one and only Djèlí Clark. Born in New York and raised mostly in Houston, he spent the formative years of his life in the homeland of his parents, Trinidad and Tobago. Djèlí Clark is the author of the novellas The Black God's Drums, a winner of the 2019 Alex Award from the American Library Association, and The Haunting of Tram Car 015, and A Dead Djinn in Cairo. His short story, The Secret Lies of the 9 Negro Teeth of George Washington, has earned him both a Nebula and Locus Award. He is loosely associated with the quarterly FIYAH, a magazine of Black speculative fiction, and infrequent reviewer at Strange Horizons. He currently resides in New England and ruminates on issues of diversity in speculative fiction. So this is really an action-packed all-star panel we got for you tonight. This is the book of the hour. I want to make sure you know you can just click this button down at the bottom, buy Ring Shot from Karis Books. We will put it in the mail to you first thing tomorrow. You can ask a question by clicking this Ask a Question button, and you can introduce yourself in the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way and let's get this party started. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, E.R. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Do we want to start with a reading, Djèlí?
Oh, you want me to do a reading first? Okay.
Maybe,
I
yeah.
can do that.
I think that, yeah. Look.
They gave me a few of these. I asked for them, but they gave me a few of these for myself, so that's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start this off. I'm going to read a bit from Ring Shout. I was looking for a good place to start, and I'm going to start a few pages in. So what's going on here is the main characters, Maryse, Sadie, and Chef, are standing on top of a building in downtown Macon, Georgia, watching a Klan rally march by. Chef stands, dusting off and taking a last savoring drag on the Chesterfield before stamping it beneath a faded Persian boot. I'm always impressed by her height. By the way, this is Maryse talking. Taller than me, certainly, and some men for that matter. She lean, too, all dark, long legs and arms fitted into a tan combat tunic and breeches. Imagine the Kaiser's men must have choked on their sauerkraut, seeing her and the black Rottlers charging in the Moose Agoon. In the trenches, only thing living besides us was lice and rats. Lice was damn useless. Rats you could eat. Just had to know the proper bait and trap. Sadie gags like she swallowed her tobacco. Cordelia Lawrence, of all the nasty stories you done told about that nasty war, that is by far the nastiest. Cordy, you ate rats? Chef just chuckles before walking off. Sadie looks to me, mimicking throwing up. I tighten the laces on my green gaiters before standing and stuff my book into a back pocket. When I reach Chef, she at the other end of the roof, peering off the ledge. Like I say, she picks up again, you want to catch a rat, get the right bait and trap, then you just wait him out. Sadie and I follow her gaze to the alley tucked behind the building, away from the parade and where nobody likely to come. On the ground is our bait, a dog carcass. It's been cut to pieces. The innards spilled out bloody and pink on the paving stones amid charred black fur. The stink of it carries even up here. You have to chop it up like that, I ask, my belly unsettled. Chef shrugs. You want to catch bees, you got to put out enough honey. Like how Bruh Fox catch Bruh Rabbit, I imagine my brother saying. Look like all we catching is flies, Sadie mutters. She leans over the edge to spit tobacco at the carcass, missing wide. I cut my eyes to her. Could you be more respectful? Sadie scrunches up her face, chewing harder. Dog dead. Spit won't hurt it none. Still, we can try not to be vulgar. She snorts, carrying on over a dog when we put down worse. I open my mouth and decide answering ain't worth the bother. Macon not missing another stray, Chef says. If it helps, old girl never saw her end coming. She passed the German trench knife at her waist, her prized souvenir. It don't help. We take to staring at the dog, the hurly-burly of the parade at our backs and our ears. I wonder why Ku Kluxes like dog, Sadie asks, breaking our quiet. Seared but bloody, Chef adds. Roasted that one on a spit. That's what I'm saying. Why dog and not, say, chicken or hogs? Maybe they ain't got chickens where they come from. Or hogs. Just got dogs. Or something that tastes like dog. My belly could do without this particular conversation, but when Sadie's on a rant, just best ride it out. Maybe I should have put some pepper and spices on it, Chef jokes. Sadie waves her off. White folk don't care about pepper and spices, like they food bland as water. Chef squints over her high cheekbones as loud skyrockets go off, followed by the booms of gas bottle bombs. I don't know, when we was in France, them Frenchies could put their foot on up in some food. Sadie's eyes narrow. You talking rats again, Cordy? Not in the trenches, in Paris, where we was after the armistice. Frenchy gals love cooking for colored soldiers. Like doing a heap more than cooking, too. She flashes the wink and smile of a rogue. Had us some steak tartare and cassoulet, duck confit, ratatouille. Sadie, fix your face, ratatouille not made from rats. Sadie don't look convinced. Well, don't know what type of white folk they got in France, but the ones here don't put no proper seasoning in their food unless they get niggers to do so for them. Her eyes widen. I wonder what niggers smell like, the Ku Kluxes. You think niggers smell like burnt dog to their noses, and that's why they come after us so? I wonder if there's even niggers where they come from, and if, Sadie, I snap, losing what little patience I got. Heaven knows I asked you more than once to stop using that word, at least in my presence. That yellow gal rolls her eyes so hard at me, it's a wonder she don't fall asleep. Why you fretting, Maryse? Always says my niggers with the big N. I glare at her. And that makes a difference, how? She has the gall to frown like I'm simple. Why, with the big N, it's respectful like. Seeing me at a loss, Chef intervenes. And how can we tell if you using a big N or a common N? Now Sadie takes a stare at both of us, like we don't understand 2 + 2 is 4. Why would I use a small N, nigga? That's insulting. I can see Chef Stump now, too. They could get all the scientists the world over to try and figure out how Sadie's mind works. Wouldn't do no good. Chef soldiers on anyway. So can white folk ever use a big N, nigga? Sadie shakes her head, as if this is all settled scripture somewhere, written down between Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Never. White folk always mean the small end. And if they try to say it with the big end, you should put their front teeth in the back of their mouth. Honestly, you too. What kind of niggas even need to ask me that question? I pursed my lips up into their full rounded glory, set to tell her exactly what kind, but Chef holds up a fist and we drop to peer over the rooftop wall. There's 3 Ku Kluxes entering the alley. That's where I'll end. Thank you.
Well, indeed. So, this, I finished the story yesterday morning, and I felt like I had been transported to, I grew up reading Doc Savage. My dad read Doc Savage pulp magazines in the 30s and then introduced me to them when they were reviving them in the 70s. And I felt like I was reading a pulp magazine that should have existed in those days. Right?
Yeah.
And so I got to ask, because I know that you have another gig as a historian.
Yeah, my day job.
And Chef, or Cordelia, right, is a tall, strapping woman who passed herself off as a man to fight in World War I among the Harlem Hellfighters.
Yeah.
Is that based on anything that you know of to be real, or?
You know, I actually, it's funny you say that. I actually looked for evidence of that happening because I was just curious. I think I thought up the character before I decided, hey, is that something that happened? And I couldn't find evidence for that particular incident of someone attempting to pass themselves off as a man to order to join the Harlem Hellfighters. But, you know, who knows? The archives are often silent on many things.
I like that as the answer for just the wave of history. Who knows?
Yeah.
I will say,
it goes.
Throwing it like I throw in only because of the idea of like researching what you find. Like the book I'm working on now, there's like a passing reference on the other side of the planet, but it was a story that was making it into the papers in Montana in 1915, I think it was. And it was about a Russian woman who dressed as a man to fight in the Russian army during World War I. And she did it because her father was killed and like all 3 of her brothers were killed. And she was basically like, so now the duty is upon me. And then she was wounded and brought to the hospital. And when they undressed her was the first time they learned she was a woman. And then the great part of the story, what I loved about the story in the article was, and then she slipped out of the hospital. And the question of the article was like, perhaps to go fight again. And so I feel like if she could do it, then we could do it.
Right. And and that's exactly it, Victor. I mean, whether it happened, I made sure to say in this specific incident, there are stories about this throughout history. Much less as well as recent history of that time period. So it was not unknown. And so, you know, plus, you know, as far as I go, I have Ku Klux monsters and owls and everything in there. I always say that if I have all that, I can do anything I want.
That's right.
Well, I'm glad you brought up monsters because I know that 2/3 of this panel are serious monster lovers.
2/3.
Yeah, well, I know you because I just I knew you had done a Fresh Air interview, but the one I heard was when you talked with I think Dave Davies about Ballad of Black Tom. I had not realized till tonight you did an interview with Terry Gross that I think must have predated the other one.
Yes.
Yeah. See, I had missed that until this very evening. Right. And then I found out that you and I both have like a warm spot for Godzilla.
Same here.
Who doesn't?
So,
Godzilla movie. When I first came to the United States, that night I always remember I sat with my dad because I lived with my grandparents for a long time. So I had the immigrant store when my parents came and got me. And I was like, who are you guys? I remember you on holidays. Who are you? Right. But that first day, I sat there with my father, eating some Ritz crackers, and we watched like Godzilla versus Monster Zero. And after that, I had to see every Godzilla movie. Right. I've seen them all.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about the new ones?
The new ones I watch, but I'm still a sucker for the old rubber suits, fighting Ghidorah and Mothra and everything else. Yeah.
I totally get that. I gotta say, has either of you seen Shin Godzilla?
Is that the one where it's like he's almost like reddish under the skin?
Japanese language.
I've only seen a trailer or something.
You gotta watch Shin Godzilla.
Okay.
It's like the smartest, most politically savvy. I mean, even compared, I think, to the original Godzilla.
Yeah.
It's the most politically savvy Godzilla movie ever made. Go watch the trailer. That trailer is, they have those parodies like Honest Trailer parody.
Yeah.
That trailer is pretty honest. There's like you barely see Godzilla in Shin Godzilla. It's mostly bureaucrats in rooms, like talking to each other. It's hilarious. So, I mean, it's a whole goof on the bureaucratic flustercluck that followed the tsunami and the meltdown, the Fukushima disaster.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant Godzilla movie. Brilliant Godzilla movie. So, so we got that out of the way.
So it sounds like there's 3 of 3 monster lovers then.
Yeah, 3.
That's right, 3 of 3.
All monster lovers here.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so we all grew up on Godzilla at some level.
Yeah.
What else? Because see, I'm old enough to have been around for when the Universal monster movies like went into heavy rotation. Like most weekdays when I was growing up, I could see Lugosi Dracula or Karloff Frankenstein or Lon Chaney playing the Wolfman on The Big Show in the afternoon.
Right.
What about you guys? Did you all also catch like the see? I did humanoid monsters, and then like I got kaiju, and it was like, oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I grew up on, it's funny, like what I don't even know if they show all those movies the same way, but I grew up at, before we had 3,000 channels. Mm-hmm. And so you only had a few. You had to like do that. Remember the UHF, the round thing in the back? You had to jiggle to get the channels just right and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I grew up on, I think they used to show those older movies from the 60s and 50s a lot more. And so I certainly grew up on those, but then there were always the newer things I wanted to watch, like The Thing and, and Aliens and those kinds of things. But sure, the old ones, yeah, especially, again, my parents, my father, I think, knew every Boris Karloff and Vincent Price type thing. So I would see them.
Yeah.
I think on my end, think about like as a kid, the way I actually learned about those monsters in particular, like the more universal was actually like Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman. Yeah. And Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy and like all those things. And that was my first introduction to them. And I think it was, for me at least, like the right, like that was my zone for a little while. Like I need to be able to laugh about this a little bit and then sort of like lean forward and say like, well, but what's the scary ones?
Right.
But yeah, no, Abbott and Costello made me love monsters because it was so silly, but I could see him at home and my mother wouldn't turn off the TV.
Yeah.
So when did you guys start reading horror? Like do you remember what the first horror stories you read were?
Like I can't.
I remember the first horror story I remember, which I think is, well, it might be Poe, like maybe something in like, grade school, junior high school.
Right.
Poe, but the one I really remember is a Stephen King story called Survivor Type.
Oh yeah.
Do you know that one? And it's about a doctor who essentially indulges in he crash lands on an island, and he's a doctor, but he's been making money basically bringing cocaine into the U.S. on his private plane, on his little small private plane. He crashes on this island. He figures out the cocaine can be used as an anesthetic, and I can eat myself in order to survive long enough to be rescued.
That's about King. Yeah.
And I was just sort of like, okay, this is for me. Yeah. This is mine. I mean that, and it's funny, and it's got like that's one of the things I loved about your reading just now was that way that like the story certainly gets gets frightening, it gets bloody.
Mm-hmm.
There's real history and all that stuff, but it's also really funny.
Right.
You know, and that's a beautiful part of this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's so funny you say that. I can't think of what the first horror story was, but I remember reading short stories, right? But they were mostly they were YA short stories meant to be horror, you know, meant to scare you a bit. But I was reading them when I was much smaller because I wanted something to scare me. And I don't think I was allowed to read the adult stuff. And then I think at some point I graduated to reading Stephen King. I don't know why. What I remember, though I'd read horror before this, what sticks out in my mind for some reason is reading Clive Barker's
The Books of Blood.
Volumes of Blood.
Yes.
And I always remember this one story. And again, I'd read horror before this, but I guess what made me think about when you're talking about severing. So he had a story called The Body Politic.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
It was literally about, yes, more hand cutting. It was about
It's the theme.
As you sleep at night, this guy sleeps at night, right hand and left hand are talking on his chest, right? And they are plotting revolution to leave the tyranny of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day, I think left goes ahead and he chops off right, and right goes off to lead the revolution. And so you can imagine in the hospital, these people wake up to find one of their hands holding a knife or a cleaver, cutting off the other one and cutting off the other one. And before you know it, there are these swarms of hands, right, leading a revolution. And I think finally they end it where they kill the revolutionaries, so they end this plot for the body politic. But then this one guy who realizes what has happened, he's like, if we're just all like a federation that's just kind of our body just decided to live together, what happens if the tongue says I want to go? What happens if the eye says I want to go? And he's like thinking on this, and then he hears this noise. And in the closet, what comes out are two legs. Who also started their own revolution, and they run off. And that's how that is some freakish stuff.
Yeah. That's the story. I think somebody made a comment on Facebook not too long ago. We were talking about Black and African folklore, and somebody cited Candyman, and I said, that's a Clive Barker story originally.
Yeah.
But do you know if it has like roots there? And I bought a book today, just weird coincidence maybe. Like 50 different card games. And I opened it at random, and it's a card game called Candyman.
Mm.
Other name is Drug Dealer. And apparently it's almost like Assassin, you know, that where the one person gets like the death card, and then they have to wink at other people. It sounds like it's some kind of game like that. But yeah, man, Barker made my soul sing.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it is interesting. Like, I feel like that particular instance, the Candyman sort of crossover.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like the original is all about, I think, what do they call them? Not tenements.
But right,
the projects
Yeah,
in England, right?
Yeah.
I forget but they have a term for them. I forget.
Yeah,
what
I
they
can't
call them.
remember the name.
But that he was like the original story is so much about British class and race stuff, and about the ways the something houses, I can't remember, and the ways that kind of like generates its own sort of legend / nightmare to haunt that place. And I have to say, I mean, I am impressed by whoever did the adaptation, however it came over, because I don't think he did it.
Yeah.
Like, for them to take many of the aspects that are there about like what kind of populations are sort of left to be hunted, right? And when they bring it to the U.S. and it's in Cabrini Green projects in Chicago, that idea of like by keeping you here, we're sort of making these hunting grounds for you. But then thinking like then you have an actor like Tony Todd who finds a way also to bring such deeper humanity to some other actor, some lesser actor. No one would be talking about that. No one would be remaking that, because you would just sort of be like, okay, it's just another monster of the week. But he really, I feel like he really
does
into something deeper and all that pathos.
Yeah, Tony Todd, my favorite Klingon.
Where was he? Who was he a Klingon?
Wasn't Tony Todd?
No.
Am I confusing him with another actor?
You mean Worf?
Not Worf. His brother.
Oh, see, I don't know Worf's brother.
Look at that. Now you got to do the quick check.
Yeah, the quick check. Yeah,
I think you're right. Now that you say it, I think you're right.
You remember his brother Kern, right? He's like, I will eat this. I will eat your burnt bird. Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to go into a Klingon tangent. I think you're so right. I didn't even thought about the adaptation to the U.S. and how Candyman is made. They even go further that he's a slave who's killed in this way. And it's funny, like the association with honey and a slave and that kind of death made me think in the Eastern Caribbean, there's the Job Molassie who's supposed to be a slave who's fallen into a vat of molasses. And he becomes this devilish figure that returns. And so I never knew if there, it made me think of this, but I can't remember if that was Clive Barker putting that in there or if that was the adaptation. What happens is when you've read the story a long time ago and the adaptation, they start
putting together.
Yes. So what was movie? What was right? It was a short story. They took a short story and turned it into a whole thing.
Yes.
Right. So that was also amazing. And so it's funny you say that whether it has antecedents, but whenever I would think of Candyman and the idea of honey and I always thought of the Job Molassie as this, sugar and this notion of consumption and how these things can destroy you and how slavery's tied into it and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and on that topic, there was a weird coincidence that happened for me. So I finished reading Ring Shout yesterday morning, and I've been gradually working my way through the first season of this the show that Mike Coulter went to after they canceled Luke Cage, Evil, on it's all that. Yeah, and so episode 8. There's like a contemporary Ring Shout going on in it. I'm like, wow, there's the stick man and everything.
Wow.
So talk about the title for people, and you don't have to talk about the context of it in the book. Talk about the actual Ring Shout, if you would, please.
Yeah. So it was interesting how one of the things I knew before I even knew the story was put together was I knew it was going to be about ring shouts. I knew the title was going to be Ring Shout. I was like, oh, that's just going to happen, right? And so, I think I first came across, I don't know when I first came across a Ring Shout. I have to think that I probably saw somebody do it as a performance at some point because there are a lot of reenactors who do Ring Shout type performances. There's a group, for instance, called the McIntosh County Singers who travel, the world doing it now. They go to Smithsonian and what have you. And so I may have seen it at some point, and then later on during research, I came across it in the archives, right? I came across it reading the ex-slave narratives. You come across it with Lomax and others who are doing all of this investigation to an American life and folkways, and they do recordings of it from the Carolinas and the Georgia Islands and what have you. And so there was something about the shout that I just always found phenomenal. Even you talk about it in the movie, like the last time I remember seeing it in a movie was actually in Beloved, the adaptation of Beloved. And we don't need to talk about what the adaptation did and whether it was good. I'm not getting into that whole thing. But there is a scene there where they do a ring shout, but they do it fantastical, where it's a woman and she's on a giant tree and everybody gets around and they start doing what is essentially a ring shout without calling it a ring shout. And these were basically often these forms of spiritual movements that would take place. They probably have their origins in some ways in West and Central Africa, but like so many other things, they are created here, right? There are these things that are created in these Black Atlantic communities, and there are versions of them you can find in the Caribbean and elsewhere in the Americas. But the ones I draw on are the ones that are well known in the American South, right? And so again, these things with some kind of antecedent in Africa, but something that's created here that's born out of the legacy of slavery and the cultural mashups that happen here. And often they are spiritual songs that are accompanied with a ring movement, and that is people move in a counterclockwise circle, but they don't cross their feet because that's dancing, in many places. And so many of the songs, however, the shouts as they move in these rings that they may sing are spiritual, but sometimes they can be secular. And if you've ever heard one, they're deeply moving, right? Even if you don't know what they're talking about. There's something about the rhythm of them, about seeing the stick man, this figure who beats a stick. And it's very simple. People are using their body as percussion instruments and a stick because these were enslaved people. They weren't, there weren't a ton of instruments around for the most part. And so they're using what they have to create these things. And often they would go into the woods and what have you. So you can imagine these. Imagine this is before they had lamps and these kind of things. So imagine people going out into the woods to find a reason to celebrate, to talk about, to pray, or to talk about what they've endured and to hope for the future, or to have a funeral or what have you. And people get into these type of spiritual trances that you can find across various religions. And, it was just something that spoke so powerfully to me that I was like, okay, this is going to go into the story and it's going to be central. And yeah, I bought it in there.
Cool. Well, so that's the, I guess, historical antecedent.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the fantastical antecedent, which is the one I was like, yeah, we have to work our way up to this.
Yeah.
So you blog as Disgruntled Haradrim.
Yes.
And use that as your Twitter handle too.
Yes.
So kindly explain for the folks why Haradrim, why he's disgruntled, where the Haradrim come from.
Well, that's a lot.
Well,
okay, I'll do the short version. You guys can go look up the rest on like arda.com or one of those things. This is from Tolkien's world. The Haradrim were, if you were wondering where the swarthier people of Tolkien's world were, they were off in Far Harad and these other places, basically being misanthropes for the most part. You see them in the movie coming on giant elephants. They're being misanthropes. They are unfortunately not allowed to be in the godly light of the spirits of Valar or what have you, and so they have fallen from grace. Right? They're not exactly orcs and what have you who are irredeemable, but they don't have the godly light. So you can take all the messianic missionary impulses from that you wish. And so, I think I decided to start the blog because I want to talk about science fiction and fantasy and talk about issues of diversity and politics or what have you. And so I said, I'm the disgruntled Haradrim, right? Because of a spat over some mystical jewelry, I get the short end of the stick, and I get to be seen as generally antisocial and misanthropic. And so that was me, disgruntled. And I've enjoyed it when anybody picks up on it, on what it is I'm talking about. Yeah. But it's also my ode to the fact that disgruntled or not, I grew up on that stuff, right?
How old were you when you read
stuff? Yeah.
How old were you when you read like Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings was one of the first things I was introduced to because I was introduced to that, I think, the Rankin and Bass cartoon.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so I was introduced to that cartoon, so I said, where does this come from? And I immediately read it, and I just devoured everything else. And I think I was so young at the time, I might have been like 7 or 8, that I don't think I understood most of it. So I read it again in middle school, right? And I read it again I think it was in high school, I finally get it all. But, so I'd read it early on. And so it was just always one of those things that was, I don't call it the foundation of my science fiction experience, because coming from the Caribbean society where I came from, like we were talking about monsters, I didn't have to watch them on TV. It was part of the local folklore and everything else, right? At night, if the dogs barked too much, people said the witches were out. And I had these kinds of things. And so I regularly lived where that was supposed to be part of the normal world, the things that people would watch on TV as monsters. So that I always say is my introduction to science fiction. But when I came to the United States, I suppose I got initiated into the literary works of people like Tolkien and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make sense of where I fit into stories about those black fellows that they say over and over again, or the men of Far Harad with black skin like trolls or what have you. Yeah. Those things would leap out to me after I read it the third time.
Right. Okay.
Right? You don't notice those things the first time.
No, you don't.
Like high school, you're like, whoa.
You can read past a lot in Tolkien.
That's a little much.
So this is a question for both of you. So for me, in fact, it was Tolkien who made me want to write.
Mm-hmm.
I can still point to literally the passage in The Hobbit, right? When they find the swords, the elven swords, Glamdring the foe hammer and Orcrist the goblin cleaver. And I looked at those words and I thought, this guy really is good at making up words. I had no idea how true that was. And honestly, I was struck by the fact that in the first sentence of your acknowledgments, you name checked Middle Earth, Anderson.
Yeah.
And so, because what struck me, the language in Ring Shout is like, I was like, wow, this is almost like a down home epic, right? Because it's very much it's from a specific character's point of view, and so you're almost invariably in dialect, which most people, of course, run screaming from nowadays.
But they love Elvish.
They do. And Klingon.
And Klingon.
Yes.
But what struck me was, I mean, first of all, it's remarkably well wrought, right? Mm-hmm. And I will say, I was right back home in Mobile, Alabama, in my sister's room, sitting on the floor between them as they were playing the dozens, when one of the characters makes reference to other women as heifers.
Yeah.
And I just fell out laughing. So here's a question for the two of you. If it was not Tolkien who made you want to be a writer, who was it? And that's a question for each of you.
Well, I mean, for me, so I feel like sometimes whenever the conversation goes into like sci-fi and fantasy, I always get kind of quiet because I always feel bad. Like the first time I read Tolkien, I read Lord of the Rings when the movies were coming out. Wow. Because I was just sort of like, I guess I should read these things. And I think I made it halfway through the second one. Right. Yeah. But I think, in part, I think because I'm saying all that to say what I grew up on, like the horror I grew up on. I mean, I would acknowledge all the amazing things that Tolkien is doing, right, in the work. But I do also think certain things have to hit you at a certain age.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right. So that you're sort of like the aperture is completely open. Mm-hmm. And so all the things can just sort of enter you. And like you're saying, like the thing that you have to notice on the third time, like if when you're reading it the first time, mm-hmm. you're at the age where you will notice it, it's just not going to get,
it's not going to get you that way.
It's just not going to get you that way.
That's it.
And so for me,
it'll
hit different. That's right. Yeah. So for me, so I grew up really much more exclusively like horror. Mm-hmm. In so Barker was absolutely foundational, King for sure. Poe, Lovecraft, Shirley Jackson a little bit later became, in many ways, the one who helped me also see, because all those writers, well, except for Barker, are also writing very much from, like, for lack of a better term, like the middle of the monoculture of their lands, right? Whereas Barker, I didn't understand why when I was younger, was able to come from another angle. Yeah. And talk from an angle that didn't presume who was important and who mattered in the story. And it took me many, many years to understand why, right? But Jackson and Barker were kind of, in a way, the people who made me see, like, particularly like Shirley Jackson with her loathing of what would be called just like average white American people. She, like, all her books are all about, they're terrible. All the people of this small town are awful, and us weirdos are the good ones. And I really needed that even though I was a kid growing up in Queens.
Yeah.
And so for me, they were the ones who made me say, like, okay, I think I could do this. And I don't think I consciously was at the youngest age thinking, and I don't see where I'm in this, or the ways I'm in this are disturbing.
Right.
But it was still sort of like the way they were painting the world started to feel like I would love to try to paint the world that way too. Yeah. And it just took a while to see, like, oh, I'm just going to paint a different part of the world.
Mm. Yeah. No, I mean, man, I think, Victor, you hit it right on the head there, because so much about what we think are like, oh, these are the best texts and they're foundational. A lot of it's nostalgia, right? Mm-hmm. We're often engaging in nostalgia, and it makes me think, my wife who isn't here, I'm going to point this out, like, she'd never seen, and everybody don't gaff, she'd never seen The Dark Crystal or The Never-Ending Story, right?
That second one hurts.
Huh?
The second one hurts even more.
And the second one hurts, right?
Yes.
And so when I would try to show these things, she'd be like, yeah. But I realized, and she's, yeah, because you have to see these as a kid. Yeah. You have to have seen those as a kid. And what she saw as a kid is still amazing to her, right? But if you don't see those things as children, it's hard to come into them later. And I think the same thing with Lord of the Rings. I don't know. Like I said, I had it in me early, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would have had the same, like, wow, if I read it, like before the films came out, right? But by that time, we've seen too much. We know too much. Right? And so, no, if I had to go back and think about the stuff that made me first think about writing was actually, I think probably, interesting enough, Ray Bradbury, Illustrated Man in middle school. But part of this was because my mother introduced me to Twilight Zone. We were like the old black and white ones I'm talking about. We were like, I think I've seen every zone. We would watch them constantly, right? And so Bradbury reminded me the most of that. And the fact that you could have these stories that had these meanings, right? And at the end, you're like, oh, this is what happens. And it had these social and political meanings, and you can think about it. And it was the first time seeing that kind of story. And I remember I would try to imitate them in writing short things for friends or what have you, or if I had a writing project, right? But I say this comes as a caveat because I didn't think of myself as, I'm going to write stories one day and publish them. That was never in my head when I was doing that. I was just doing this for friends or to imitate. And for various social reasons we can talk about, I never thought of writing as a career. That the person who embodied where I lived, where I was from, that was never a thing that I was going to do well until like literally after college, right? Even in college when I was more and more interested, and by then I was critiquing my Bradbury, right? The Other Foot, the story about the black people all going to Mars. I wrote a whole blog on that, right? How much I loved it, and then don't. By then, by then I was reading Malcolm X and listening to Kwame Ture tapes, and so all of that is feeding into me, and I was introduced. I was reading a lot. I was introduced to Richard Wright and all these black authors in my collegiate lit class that nobody had bothered to introduce me to, through my high school and middle school. And I think that's when I first came across, Butler and, and Delaney and all these other, I was like, wait, there are black people writing this stuff and nobody told me? Why? Why did you let me go through my whole life and not know this, right? And so I always say like that, it was sometime after all of that I said I want to come to writing. And so I always think that what inspired me to write was sometimes the sci-fi certainly I was ingesting, but a lot of my early sci-fi was heavily didactic and political. And it was a mix of that old Twilight Zone Bradbury and now added to me listening to a whole lot of Kwame Ture and all of these other things. Trying to put a little bit of it together, right? Like those stories are a little bit much. But that was the early stuff. And then it was like reading the Richard Wrights and all of these, reading, Native Son and these kinds of things. And, reading a lot of Toni Morrison and, Nick Giovanni poems. And that was my influence. And I was like, how can I adapt this stuff to speculative fiction? Mm-hmm. Right. And, then it took phases for me to I won't say exactly leave that phase, but to develop beyond that. right? To think more about the craft, to think more about speculative fiction itself as genre, and how we can put these things together. But it took a while, right? So yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about another potential influence. I spent a couple of years writing and editing and co-creating, in some cases, horror role-playing games for White Wolf Game Studio. And I don't know if y'all played anything in that world, not White Wolf specifically, but any of these RPGs. I was shocked to find out that I think Juno Diaz is right. Like, he has a history with these. I think still goes to his, before COVID. I remember seeing a video of him going to the game shop. Mm-hmm. So is that anything that y'all ever dipped a toe into, or?
I did. I think probably. I mean, definitely when I was younger, I had a little crew who did Dungeons and Dragons, and so we played a little of that. I would say I have to say, like, well, no, I think we took it as seriously as we could reasonably take it, without. I mean, I don't know. Every group of kids is different, but there wasn't like that leader kid who's a little more into it and then kind of pulls everyone deeper into the zone. So it's sort of like we would occasionally say, someone would say, like, I'm going to be a DM, I'm going to run a campaign, and then we played a game called Champions, which was superheroes RPG for a minute, and then there was Call of Cthulhu. That was another RPG. Yeah. And so all of them, I think it was like we dabbled, and but it never became the full. This is going to sound so silly, but part of the reason why I didn't think it at the time, but now I think it. When so this is must have been mid to early '80s. I remember there was a TV movie.
You're gonna say it with Tom Hanks.
With Tom Hanks. Where he plays D&D and he goes through mazes and monsters, and he has a mental break.
Yes.
And he sees Dungeons and Dragons happening in New York City. And I'm so embarrassed to even say it, but I really feel like it worked on me, like Nancy Reagan style, and made me just say no to RPGs.
Right.
Like,
right.
I was really like, I'm gonna turn into Tom Hanks.
Yeah. That was a huge television event.
Yes, I remember. And they did a good job. I remember the minutes.
Everyone would gather around and watch because they were certain that RPGs and Dungeons and Dragons in this particular was creating, human zombies out of kids and everything. And something similar happened to me where I had a family member, not my immediate family member, begin whispering words that maybe I was into this stuff too much. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting was that I had all the Dungeons and Dragons books, and I played it less than I loved the books. And which book did I love the most? The
Monster Manual.
The Monster Manual, of course.
Gotta be
in the Fiend's portfolio, whatever. But I read that Monster Manual. I knew that Monster Manual. Boy, I mean, that was my jam. That Monster Manual. I just walked around with them and just flip it. And what was cool was like all the kids that I was into in middle school, right? These would be the cool kids, the nerdy kids. They'd see that Monster Man, they'd be like, yo, they would be like, look at that, and just loving it. And so we would play games sometimes, and we had a kid who could draw really well, and so he would draw us the characters, and we'd love that. But I swear we played it less than we just liked the ideas of what those worlds could be and the characters and the monsters and what have you. So, yeah, I mean, and I think, I don't know if that brought me any closer to horror as much as I love beasties and monsters. So that helped me there. But I mean, yeah, definitely.
Well, so it's funny you bring up mazes and monsters. I don't have a mazes and monsters story, but I have a Rona Jaffe story that I'm going to tell, like really, really compressed. So I wound up at lunch one day with Rona Jaffe and two like food writers, Natalie Dupree and who the Moosewood cookbook author is, Molly Katzen.
Yeah.
And, it's over lunch and we're chit-chatting. And I said, I was brought up Catholic, but my dad went to mass only on Christmas Eve. And my mother never went. And I didn't realize that she actually wasn't Catholic until she converted like in the last 5 years of her life. But man, they sent us to mass every Sunday, and Rona Jaffe turned in her chair and stared at me a second, and she said, "Dear, that's when your parents had sex." So it wasn't that Rona Jaffe made me just say no. Rona Jaffe made me just say no.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, at some point, you had to know that your parents had sex. At some point, you had to learn in adulthood.
Yeah.
Here's what it is. Here's what it is.
It is what it is.
I don't see any questions from the audience yet, so I guess we'll press on. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about specifically in the writing of the book, Fenderson, or inspirations for the book, or you know?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I loved like just essentially the existence of a magic sword.
Yeah.
Right. And just like speaking of like ties to fantasy, legend, myth, just the magic weapon, right? Like and then as the book toward the end goes, where we learn its much deeper significance, you know. Yeah. But I wonder, did you always know that would be her weapon?
Yeah. I always knew there was going to be a magic sword, and that is because it's funny as people ask me like how to define it, and I listen to people say it's body horror. Okay, I'll take that. It's cosmic horror. Sure, if you say so. And you know, I think I first pitched it as it'll be a gothic. So I guess that works. Gothic Southern. That sounds nice. Yeah. I mean, at the very heart of it, though, I think going back to how we first started, I was writing a fantasy story.
Right.
I was writing. That's why you said I name checked Tolkien, I name checked Westeros and all that, and I said, yeah, I'm writing a fantasy story. And, you know, and I think I say in the acknowledgments, like, you know, the fantasy stories we have don't all have to be set in some kind of quote unquote medieval England, you know, the England that somehow has tobacco, but, you know, a medieval England, or even, you know, God bless the late Charles Saunders. I've written stories in a medieval traditional Africa, but I said they don't all have to be there either, right? We can do something different, especially we descendants of the Black Atlantic, right, who exist in both of these worlds. And so I was like, why can't we have a fantasy story set in the South? Why can't we have it set in Macon, Georgia? I'll give you the magic. There's magic there to have. Have you met the Gullah? Have you met the Ichi? There's magic here. I'll give you monsters. There's certainly enough Southern horrors to talk about, right? We can talk about that. And I will also give you a heroine with a magic sword, right? All right. Yes. She's not going to slay the Witch King of or what have you, but you know, she's got the sword. And so I was like, it has to be a sword. I love the idea of swords, like you said, magical swords that are almost sentient or semi-sentient. I love the idea of weapons that might have a mind of their own, right? Yeah. That you don't know if you're acting or if it's acting.
Right.
And you often have to watch yourself with, you know, there's so many metaphors to peel back there about, you know, about this weapon. And so I knew that was there, but I don't think I knew. I think as I was writing the story and dreaming it up, I worked in the idea, I don't want to give the spoilers of what the sword is and its particular form of magic, right? And I remember when I first wrote that, I was like, oh, can I do this? Is this going to be too much? I was like, why not?
Just do it. That's it.
A lot of the story, by the way, was a lot of, why not? A lot of me going, am I allowed to do this? And then, you know, I think I told you, I read A Ballad of Black Tom. I was like, he put Supreme Alphabet in here. I can do anything. That's right. Oh, he just threw some 5% Wu-Tang, brand new type. Nobody knows what you're talking about.
That's right.
And I said, he can do this and get away with it. And I was like, after people even know what this is, then I can do anything I want. Go with it. And by the way, I love putting in, and I do it in here, all these cultural references that I know. I knew when you wrote Supreme Alphabet, you were like, "Is nobody gonna get this?" You know them some hip hop, some '90s hip hop, or they've been in Queens or Brooklyn, and you know, met some gods and earths talking their cipher business. They have no idea what you're talking about, but I love it. It still makes the story work. People don't stop and like explain this supreme alphabet to me and divine mathematics.
Yes.
It's like, I'm just gonna put it in there because it's something that I've seen within my experience and my cultural milieu. I'm going to throw that into this fantasy, this cosmic horror story, and you'll deal with it. It's something different.
Right. That's right. And I mean, thank you for saying that. And I do really feel like along the same lines you're saying, like as far as I was concerned, as like a kid growing up in New York City, in one of the eras of hip hop's growth, like as far as I was concerned, the ciphers and the gods and earths, that was superhero magic to me.
Right.
You know, and when they would break down, like, what's today's lesson? And just
arm,
listening
leg,
to
arm, head.
Yes, arm, leg, arm, head, and that's one of my favorite ones. And just being like, this is code. This is a spell. This is all that stuff.
And it was also secretive that they could say, I self Lord and Master. And what does that mean? What are you talking? Yes. And when you knew it, like you weren't a part of it, but you knew it, you felt like, I got some secret info.
That's right.
I'm listening to Wu-Tang or I'm listening to Brandon. I understand what they're saying, and you guys have no idea.
I have no idea. Yeah. And really feeling like that in that same way, like I felt similar. Can I get away with this? And just said like, well, let's see. I mean, they might not buy it. Yeah. Like, I mean, this was like when I was sending it to Tor, I figured like they might just say this Supreme Alphabet thing is just nonsense. I can't, but they didn't. They just said like, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, okay. Ellen Datlow, she was like, yeah, it works. I was like, okay, here we go.
That's great stuff. No, I mean, and it's funny that you're talking about this. I know I'm just going off a tangent here, but I think of this now. I don't know how many of you are watching Lovecraft Country, the HBO adaptation. And what's fascinating to me is, like you, Victor, I read Matt Ruff's book like right before. Like I said, I better read this real quick, right? I think it was only out in 2016, so I heard about it. And so I said, let me read this. I read it like days before the premiere. I went through it pretty quick. It's such a Pulp Fiction feel. It's just easy, quick reading. Yes. And then I saw what the show did. And of course, a series has to change things in the book, but I'm always interested in how people change and what people change. And especially when you have a room of Black and brown writers who are like, I listened to their podcast. They said, we were going to take his book as the Bible, then we were going to do what we wanted. Yes. And man, have they.
They have. That's right.
They have made it, like they've thrown down a gauntlet, right? Yes. Like I said, I don't know if you can go back from this. So many of the tropes and things that you weren't allowed to do, it seems, as a Black filmmaker and a Black creator. Oh, you can't have a very angry person. You've got to have a white savior figure, or you've got to make the radical figure a bit goofy. And they're just like, no, we're going to tell you experience. You have to make the Black character perfect, and all of them have to be perfect and heroic. They were just like, no, we're just going to rip that all up, and we're going to take the bones of this story, but just shape it into something like again, it reminds me of what you did in a sense. I can imagine often in the writer's room, they're like, do you think we can get away with this? We can just throw it in here? Yeah, why not? Let's just do it. Let's throw Gordon Parks photos in here. That's right. Let's just throw everything.
Sonia Sanchez poems.
Let's just do it.
Yes.
Let's turn Topsy and Black caricatures into horror figures.
That was amazing.
Yeah. That is the most genius thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And so I think about, as Black creators, as we're doing these things, I'm hoping that, it's telling people like, do it, right? Because I know we always have this inner censoring voice at times, like, I don't know if I can get away with that. I don't know if I can do that. And I hope that what we're seeing now is this moment where people are like, look, I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to put it out there.
Yes.
And I'm going to bring these things into places it shouldn't be, right? And I'm just going to, like when I think I first read Kai Ashanti, his works, and he had, had these characters speaking in modern Black dialect, but it was a fantasy book. And I was like, yeah, he can just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Why not?
So now we have some questions.
Yeah, sorry, that was my long rant.
That's
my writers, man. Do it.
And so this is actually, somebody wants each of you to talk about your drafting process, like what, when do you write, where do you write, Are you still doing a donut shop, Victor? What's to tell the tale? Tell the tale of the tales.
The tale of the tales. Well, I will say my process now has. So I've never been more productive than after my wife had our two kids, right? And the reason for that is because before the kids came, besides say if I was working, I would have 8 or 10 hours to write in theory, and I'd spend 6 of it just messing around, listening to some music, turn on a show, this and this, whatever. But then the kids came, especially when our first son came. My wife and I made an agreement that each of us, we both teach, and so in the summer we had a little time off from teaching, and we'd agreed when he was born, each of us would get 2 hours out of the house each day. Like that's the most we were going to get. And it's that limitation actually became a benefit to me that I didn't understand at the time. But what I learned was I started realizing like this 2 hours has to be the time when I create, because then the rest of the time, the rest of life needs me. And then I got this full-time teaching job, and life continues to add things to your life. And so my process now is that there's a 2 hour window, say 3 to 5 days a week, when I say like I have 2 hours beginning of the day, like before everything starts, end of the day, something like that. And in that time, I need to get the work done. And having that limit is actually kind of helpful, because then I don't say to myself, if I'm working on a novel, oh, I have to just sit here for 20 hours and write the whole book or something like that. In 2 hours, I say, all I'm going to get done is I might write a scene, but I can just focus on the scene. And then the next day, another scene and another scene. And these things sort of build. And that for me, I've discovered, speaking of the drafting process, is just really more like more than anything else, it's routine that has saved my life. And writing 2 or 3 pages a day, in a week, you've got 10, let's say 10 pages. In a month, you've got 40. In a year, you've got about 560. 250 of it will be garbage and will be thrown away. But in a year, coming up with 250 pages that might be decent,
yeah,
that's a good life.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Henderson?
It's like the process. Like
yeah.
You said 2 kids. So like I always tell people, what's interesting to me is that I'm an academic historian. And so I have a whole other writing life, right? I have teaching life, and I have articles to write. I have a whole book manuscript. It's a whole different thing, right? That I'm still working on. And it just so happened that my academic life and my writing, my speculative writing career took off at the same time. In fact, the day that A Dead Djinn in Cairo was published on Tor.com, which was like my biggest, up until then, that was like my biggest sale. I've written short stories and elsewhere, but what it's like? It's like, oh, it's going on tour. Mm-hmm. That's like real now. Those are the guys on the back of all my book covers at home, my Dragon Reborn covers and things, right? It's like it's going to be a big audience. This isn't like a short story somewhere. This is huge. And so I remember nervously, I'm checking my phone, and what am I doing that same day? I'm walking to get my PhD, right? I'm like really going up to the stage. And so it's like, so both kind of took off at the same time, and I had to be responsible for both, right? Okay, now I have these things called deadlines, right? It's no longer, I'll just write, and I'll just, like you said, I'll take hours doing this and that, and I'll write when I want to, la-di-da, I'm going to take off some time. Now it's like, oh, I have deadlines now, and I have academic writing deadlines, and I have to do this. And so those 2 things happened. And then in 2018, I had twin girls, right? Our family added two wonderful girls to the picture. And so everything that I had done put together for my writing routine, pretty much boom. Right? Right. Because I had it together a bit with the academic before the kids. Because I went through this entire training on how to get time how to manage your time to write. And this was academically. And what I did was I simply applied it to my creative writing. Mm-hmm. My creative writing actually became my reward. Like, okay, when I'm done with my academic stuff, I'm going to enjoy myself by doing some speculative writing, right? I can be a little free, no more going through 19th century newspapers and manuscripts and footnotes. Thank God my stories don't require footnotes. It's great. And so I had a system, and then I had kids. And whole system got erased. And so now my routine, I say, is often, it is, I think, a lot of what Victor's talking about. I think I cherish the time now. I try to cut out the nonsense that might happen. If I'm going to write, it might mean, don't say I'm going to write, then, I ended up reading all of Twitter, all of Twitter for 6 hours. I need to write. And having deadlines now and having contracts when things are due is just a completely different ball game for me from when I was just writing as I wanted. Now, this is due. We gave you a date. How's it coming? Right? When's that draft coming? Everybody's, it's like, I'm not just waiting on it. Whole people are waiting on it to copy edit. And so I think that added responsibility has made me really recognize, okay, I need to carve out this time to write, even if it's at night after the kids are in bed. Sometimes it might be for 2 hours a night, right? If I can, until I get tired. If I'm really going, I might write a little longer. But there's always that point where you need to stop, otherwise it'll be nonsense, right? I do little tricks like I learned, like I park things downhill where right before I come to a scene I've been waiting to write. I decide I'll write it tomorrow, because when I pick up, I'll know exactly what I want to do. I'm not like looking at it, what's next? I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And so little things like that, but really a lot of it for me is, I think, like what Victor said, it's time management, and then making that time productive is how it's been. And so far it's working. I've gotten things done, but I have noticed, for instance, because again, I'm an academic, like my last novel I did, A Master of Djinn, I said, okay, I'm gonna sketch it all out and I'll start it during the regular long semester. And we'll see how much I get done. So I think I started like in January, and then the semester happens and all kinds of things happen. I have my academic book manuscript due, I have book chapters due, I have teaching and everything else. And I think between that time, I got 5 chapters done, which was great because it put me on a path when the summer came. In the summer, right? It took all that time and all those months. In 2 months in the summer, I got 20 more chapters done. Just showing you how when the academic stuff wasn't there, it just opened up all this time for me. But I'm so glad I worked on it during that time. I didn't take a break. That I worked on it little by little during that time, and I got 5 chapters done during that semester, because that put me on a path to just hit, like it was like the baton was passed to me, and now I could run and just do what I wanted. So that's how it's been working out. I don't advise it for everyone, but it's what I've been attempting to do. Yeah.
So someone Henderson wants you to talk about the importance of centering Black women as the heroes in Ring Shout and other works.
Yeah. I always give, it's like the most cop-out answer. I always feel, yet it's true, that I tell people that my characters tend to arise organically, right? And so when I imagined Ring Shout, I knew exactly who Maryse was going to be. I knew exactly Chef. Sadie was the one I added after when I said I need a wild card in there. Right? I need a Flavor Flav in here. I need what you call it from Girls Trip. I can't think of the wild card in Girls Trip of the crew, right? I need somebody who can just blow things up at times, right? To take away from some of the seriousness here, right? And to just sometimes speak these truths that nobody else wants to speak, and she'll just say them. And so I knew that those characters were going to be there. And I'm once I knew that they were going to be these characters, I knew it was important that I handled them with care. I knew it was important that, that in some ways I modeled them after some women that I've known in my life in some ways. And I thought about them carefully in the ways that they would exist in this world, in this space, right? In these bodies, how they would exist. And so I'm really happy that a lot of people see those characters and they resonate. In fact, believe it or not, I had fought not to have the book cover we have now, though I love that book cover. But when it was pitched to me, I was like, no, I think it needs to have Maryse on the front, right? They need to see this black character front and center, because I thought about when I was younger, and I barely saw black characters on the front of right? And I certainly didn't see any black women, right? And so when I had the Black God's Drums and they showed me this young black girl on the front cover of that, I was like, that is the cover that's going to launch 1,000 imaginations, just seeing that cover with all these airships. And so I wanted something like that, even though I love the cover now. The cover they came up with was fantastic, right? But I had first wanted that because I wanted people to see these figures prominent. Because I think it's so important that we often see faces and people we don't expect in these spaces to just be there. Right, that's important in itself. Just seeing them is important. So this is going out to anyone who does fan art or anything of the sort. I'm all for it. I love it. If you want to imagine who these characters are and what they look like, please go ahead.
There's an invitation to everybody listening. There's a question for Victor. People want to know what you're working on, and then Fenderson, they want to know if we're going to get a map with Master of Djinn. So, Victor, you go first.
Well, the thing I'm working on next is actually another historical short novel set in Montana in 1915. And it's about lone women homesteaders in Montana at the time. And in particular, one of the things that I didn't know until I was like reading about it by chance was that the way that the laws were written, well, essentially so they had sent in the army to remove as much as possible, all the native populations who were living there originally. And then part of the homesteading project was, we need to take over this land so that they don't come back, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of the project. And so they were in a hurry to have people set up homes on these parcels of land, and they were so desperate for people to do it that they, the federal government essentially bent a lot of the rules you might expect for the time period. So what that meant was women could homestead land alone, and it didn't just mean white women. There were some black women homesteaders. There were eventually some Mexican homesteaders, like women who'd come up, and even eventually some native women. Chinese women, there were Chinese in Montana at the time, but they were not allowed because of all the anti-Chinese sentiment that was just riddling the West Coast because there were too many Chinese people for white people, and they were doing too well. And so that was suddenly a reason for them to not be there. And so this book is about a black woman who is the child of black farmers in California who, after a really horrific incident with her family at home, she runs to Montana where she hooks up with these other lone women homesteaders. And then there's also a monster.
Is it a troll? No, I'm joking.
I can't do it twice. I'm like Daffy Duck in that one cartoon. I can only do that trick once.
Not read the work. Everybody was talking. You must read that work. Yeah.
That's very kind of it. But yeah, so that'll be maybe hopefully end of sometime in the fall of next year. It's called Lone Women, and it should be fall 2021 or maybe spring 2022.
Okay. Yes. That sounds amazing. If it is as fantastic as Changeling, which I like.
Oh man, that's very kind.
Man, I don't like when I read that. I was telling somebody I reread it the other day, and the rich detail, the way it feels like. That's why I asked you where you were. Like, yeah, you're definitely in the Heights.
Yes.
Like, I mean, every little thing. You were like that crack on that sidewalk there back in 1992, and I knew. I mean, I have never felt as immersed in a world. It's our world for the most part. Even though it's a fantastic world that it's on the edge, right? But it's our world, and just the attention to detail you would have in there is just like. Just amazing. So I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to see this.
That's kind of you. I mean, I have to say, I want to hear the map answer before time is up. But I did want to just pay a sort of a similar compliment, but on the opposite direction. Like, at least for me, I always feel like one of the things I'm so impressed by with your work is also the way you make so many different places feel as tangible, as real as that. Because honestly, like, I'm just kid from New York. I'm just almost always writing New York, which is part of why I'm scared about this Montana thing.
Yeah.
But also excited. But in your case, I love and appreciate the confidence with which so many different places feel real. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's great, because I'm always like, does it feel like you're there? Because, I mean, that's so important that people are immersed in that. Yeah. And so I would say, I think people want to know about a map in Master of Djinn.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's a for all of magical.
I mean, for one, well, it's Cairo, so giving like a map of Cairo. And have you seen Cairo? Cairo, you can look at a map of Cairo, especially, I mean, streets that don't fully have names. I mean, it's a lot. I don't know if they're putting in a map. That's something that'd be interesting. But one of the things I did want to do, if we want a map of sorts, I created a whole timeline for that world.
Okay.
I created an entire full-on timeline. So I give you a map of how that world was created. Like, I mean, with all my different alternate things about, and I ended up using that timeline as my own, right? Like, when I was be writing, I was like, can I say that? Did it actually happen? That was like my grail. Like, okay, yeah, that happened. I can go back and put it in. And so I asked for that timeline to go into the book, but the thing is, the book is more of a mystery than a fantasy, and they don't want it to have that epic, where you like, I wanted a glossary, like, we don't have glossaries, and it's not an epic, but I do have my own websites, and I can put all this stuff up.
You can do whatever you like. Yeah.
So, all of that is, there are a lot of things that, you have to leave out of books. I mean, going back to Ring Shout, one of the great inspirations, I think I said Ring Shout, were these ex-slave narratives that I was reading in the WPA, right? It was there that I'd first heard these former slaves giving these interviews in the 1930s during the Great Depression talk about the Klan as monsters, right? Because they're talking about the first Klan, and they would talk about them wearing horns and all these different accompaniments, and sometimes pretending they had tails, and they would call them haints and spirits. And that's where I kind of developed my idea of the Klan as monstrous, right? I kind of took it from this and was inspired by it. But there were a lot of things that I wanted to put in the book in Ring Shout. For instance, they have a lot of commentary on what they think of the first Klan, and I wanted to put that into Ring Shout, and fortunately I couldn't. They cut it out. But all this I'm saying is I plan on putting all those little commentaries on my website at some point, so that people can see all the things that I had to leave on the cutting room floor.
I also, if I could talk there, I daydream, like everything you just said, like for Ring Shout, like one of the things I really love is seeing like within like at least the sort of horror small press and stuff like that, like when they do these gorgeous like slipcase master text versions of a book, and just thinking like I'm already daydreaming for tour, say like in a year or 2 years, where they just have the slipcase version that has all that extra material, and all of that is available, would be just amazing.
Maybe then I can even, I didn't tell you about the song part. Like, so songs play a role in here. And there's one character, in fact, who tends to talk through singing. Don't want to give away too much. But her songs were like actual songs. I had Stevie Wonder in there. I had Beyonce, because she sings through time, right? I had UGK lyrics. I had everything you think of, Biggie lyrics. I had Little Woo. I had all this stuff. And my editor said, let me introduce you to copyright.
Yeah. We just can't do it.
All of it had to go. So who knows? One day, the great Beyonce lyric from Formation that was supposed to be in there, I had to become a songwriter now. I had to create my own songs. I could use theirs. And so all these things, who knows? One day, someday, they might make it in there. So you can see all these lyrics. And I wanted people to read it and just laugh out loud, like, oh, I know this.
Yeah.
One last question. There's a moment when I swear I felt like there was a character who totally overlaps with The Secret Lives of the Nine Negro Teeth of George Washington. I I'm betting you can guess what character I'm thinking of.
I want to know.
The blacksmith.
Oh, the blacksmith.
The blacksmith.
Uh-huh.
Is like, wait, isn't this the same backstory for the blacksmith in Secret Lives?
Oh, the ancestral, yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. I hadn't put those two together. Look at that.
Well,
it's great.
It's funny how but that's true. Your muse will do those kind of things. I'm like Swiss Beats. I'm gonna keep giving you the same beats to everybody.
You know,
everyone tries to do that. He just give you the beats. It's like he gave me that same thing.
That totally worked for me, I gotta say. And I should say too, right? Let me fess up, right? Victor, no offense. We put I left my heart in Scottafel at the beginning of Mothership for good reason. But I gotta say, man, Secret Lives of Non-Negro Teeth of George Washington, I think, is the best piece of American short fiction I've read in 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a John Joseph Adams connection. There's a John Joseph Adams connection too between the two of you, right? I know, Victor, you did a People's Future of the United States, co-edited with him.
Right.
I found out about Secret Lives because John Joseph Adams does these lists on Twitter of stuff that he's read that he thought was spectacular. And I see this story, and the title is just like, okay, I've got to read The Secret Lives of Non-Negro Teeth of George Washington. Afterward, could not shut up talking about it, which is how I wound up, right? I'm on the planning committee for the Decatur Book Festival when it happens. And I told the committee head about it. And next thing I knew, Fenderson was coming to Atlanta.
Coming to Decatur.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that was one of those things you read about. I remember when I first read that in the Mount Vernon about teeth, and I was like, there's a story in here somewhere. And I don't know how it started. I still have the little book where I was jotting down the vignettes, and it worked. What can I say?
Yes.
It really works. I'm going to be teaching that story in like 2 weeks. So, to a fiction writing class in Principia.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm very excited. Gentlemen, I think we are very near time. Anybody have any infamous last words?
Well, I wanted to ask you a real quick question, because when we were getting the intro, you said that your first novel was coming. I wonder if you take a minute to tell us about that.
Sure. So Dread Isle is it cooks together a lot of stuff that I loved as a kid. So essentially Tom Swift Jr. and Johnny Quest. But it hit me one day. I was like, we need a less racist version of Tom Swift Jr. and so that's what I started doing. And I started writing it. My friend Tim Bird said, you should write a young adult book. And that's how it started. And it got stranger and it got a little more arcane. But yeah, it's, I don't know, it's maybe ring shout length. It's not enormous because I'm a miniaturist, right? Like when most of my short stories might be 400 or 500 words. And so this is maybe only it's like 43,000 words. It was supposed to be illustrated, and I never could get that together. So maybe the second edition will be an illustrated edition, but now
illustrated Tom Swift meets Johnny Quest, but less rated.
It kind of is that with a little more thrown in the blender, but yeah. So it's like boy inventor adventure story.
Hey,
yeah.
I think it's great that we pull on these things from our childhood and we say we like that thing, but we want to see better.
Yes, that's right.
That's exactly what it was. That was exactly the impulse. So right now it's got a December 15th pub date.
Okay.
Nice.
But I right, like follow it on Twitter, the progress at Edward Austin Hall, at Edward A. Hall. But on Twitter is Edward Austin Hall.
Beautiful. Thank you for telling us.
Disgruntled Haradrim. And Victor, you're not on Twitter, are you?
I'm on Twitter, just my name.
That's right, Victor Lavalle.
Yeah, I'm P. Djèlí Clark on that. I have that other thing, but I'm at P. Djèlí Clark I'm easy to find.
All right.
Keep it one thing. Keep it simple.
That's right. That's
There
right.
you go. So, all right.
All right.
Great conversation. I love this.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Ed, for being a wonderful moderator. Thank you, Victor, for always inspiring us with your stories. Thank you, Djeli, for this book. We are so thrilled about it. Folks, if you have not bought your copy of Ring Shout yet, click that teal button at the bottom of your screen right there. We'll send it out to you right away. You know that you are going to want to get one for a friend, start a book club, all the things. Thank you to our friends from the Auburn Avenue Research Library. Before you leave, you might want to just go ahead and open some tabs with all these resources that they dropped in the chat. They got really great stuff going on over there. The last thing it's my job to do is to remind you that all of our events are individually donor funded, which means that we're a nonprofit. We are really grateful to anything folks are able to do to support our work. $1, $5 really helps us out, pays for this platform, and keeps all this work going so that we can do these virtual conversations. And yeah, we're going to turn this, we're going to repackage it, put captions on it, and put it on YouTube. So just keep an eye out for that. And we'll also be sharing it on the Auburn Avenue Research Library page. So thank you all so much for this conversation. It was a real joy. And I think you pointed folks in a lot of great reading directions too. So that's always nice for booksellers to be like, yes, and here, go read all this other stuff. So those are my favorite kind of book events. So appreciate y'all. Please stay safe, and we can't wait for the next round of books.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
All right. One thing before we go. You know Wendy Dunlap?
I do know Wendy very well. Yeah.
She really wants you to return her emails. I said it live on air.
That is almost shaming me enough to maybe do it. I will definitely get it done. Sorry, Wendy.
That's all I'm going to say. She's probably going to say, "Thank you, brother," right now. Your old Cornell friend. So
that's it. That's it.
My work is done.
All right, I will do it. I appreciate
all right.
it.
Bye, everybody.
Good night,
Good night, everyone.
Wear your mask. Wear goggles.